welcome to Reform Thinking.
Glad to be here.
I want you to imagine the year is AD 57.
Oh, a very specific year.
Yeah, very specific. You are sitting in this, dimly lit, super crowded room right in the heart of the most intimidating, massive empire on Earth.
Rome.
Right, Rome. And the air is just thick with the smell of olive oil lamps and, let's be honest, unwashed bodies.
Yeah, ventilation wasn't great back then.
No, not at all. And the tension in that room is just palpable. You are sitting there waiting to hear a letter read aloud from a guy who, well, not that long ago, used to hunt your friends down for a living.
Which is just a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. You have never met him face to face, but you know his reputation. He's brilliant, he's controversial, and he is, systematically reshaping the known world with his ideas.
Spot on.
So this highly anticipated correspondence has finally arrived in your city, and the seal is about to be broken.
The anticipation must have been off the charts.
Oh, absolutely. And that is the literal ground-level reality the Roman Church experienced when the text we now call the Book of Romans actually arrived at their door.
Yeah.
So today we are taking a deep dive into the historical, cultural, and personal background of that very letter.
It is a totally gripping historical reality to analyze because, we so often read ancient texts in a vacuum.
Right, like they just existed outside of time.
Yeah, we strip away all the dirt, the noise, the political friction and the sheer anxiety of the era. We treat the text like it just dropped out of the sky into this perfectly sterile environment.
Which it definitely didn't.
Not even close. When you look at the concrete facts of the first century Mediterranean world, you see something entirely different. You see a world that is primed for a massive shift.
Yeah.
I mean, the mechanics of the Roman Empire, the sociological makeup of the local cities, the specific educational systems of the day, all of it played a necessary role.
It's all connected.
It is. And when we look at this through a lens that recognizes the sovereign orchestration of history, it becomes super clear that specific birthplaces, imperial politics, and local demographics were perfectly aligned.
Right, aligned to ensure this specific message reached its destination.
Yes. The creator was utilizing the natural mechanics of history to set a very specific stage.
And that is the mission of this deep dive. We want to know who was writing, who they were writing to, and the highly specific ground-level strategies they used to spread their message across the globe. We're drawing all this from the first century background commentary by W. Harold Mare, by the way.
A great resource.
Oh, fantastic resource. We are going to look at the literal architecture, the laws, the social classes of the ancient world to see how they functioned. Okay, let's unpack this. To understand the letter itself, we first have to understand the highly unusual qualifications of the author.
Highly unusual is putting it mildly.
Right. We're looking at a man with a paradoxical resume. He has an identity that spans two completely different worlds, starting with his very name.
Paradoxical is the perfect word for him. The author holds dual names, which it immediately signals to anyone paying attention that he operates in dual worlds.
Right.
On one side, you have his Greco-Roman name, Paul, and on the other side, you have his Hebrew name, Saul.
Which wasn't just a nickname situation.
No, not at all. This duality is not just some quirky historical footnote. It is a vital clue to his identity and his access to different spheres of society. Having a Roman name allowed him to conduct business, travel, and interact with the administrative state seamlessly.
He blended in.
Yeah, he blended in perfectly. While his Hebrew name connected him directly to the ancient traditions, the synagogues, and the religious heritage of his ancestors. And we have to mention, he was born a Roman citizen.
Which is huge. We need to clearly define what that meant back then.
We really do. In the first century, Roman citizenship was not something everyone living in the empire just automatically possessed.
Not at all.
It was an exclusive club. It granted you very specific legal protections. For instance, a Roman citizen could not be flogged or tortured without a trial.
Wow. Yeah. They had the right to appeal any legal case directly to the emperor in Rome, and they were exempt from certain grueling forms of capital punishment, like crucifixion.
Having that kind of legal immunity in a world ruled by the sword is just an unbelievable advantage.
A total game changer.
It is essentially a diplomatic passport that keeps local magistrates from just throwing you in a dungeon and throwing away the key. But he wasn't just a citizen by birth. He was educated in a very specific elite environment.
Tarsus.
Right, he was raised in Tarsus. And to give you some context, Tarsus wasn't just a random dot on a map. It was located in Cilicia, down in Southeast Asia Minor, and it was a massive secular university center.
Really high-tier stuff.
Oh yeah, it rivaled places like Athens and Alexandria for intellectual prestige. It was a major hub for Stoic philosophy.
So he's surrounded by that from day one.
Exactly. You have a man who grows up breathing the air of Greek philosophy, secular debate, and cosmopolitan thought. He totally understands how the pagan world thinks because he was educated right in the middle of it, which is such a unique background for a Jewish scholar.
It is. But then his educational track takes a sharp, drastic turn. As a young man, he leaves this secular university town and goes to Jerusalem.
Into the religious epicenter.
Yep, to be trained as a strict Pharisee under the renowned Gamaliel. And we are talking about the highest possible level of rigorous Orthodox Jewish training available at the time.
Gamaliel was not just any teacher.
No, Gamaliel was essentially the equivalent of a Supreme Court justice and a legendary academic combined into one guy.
What's fascinating here is the precise combination of these elements. It is an incredibly rare synthesis of skills.
Yeah, you don't usually get all those in one person.
Right. You have the intellectual rigor of a Jerusalem Pharisee trained by the most respected rabbi of the era. This means he had massive portions of the ancient Hebrew texts memorized.
Just locked in his brain.
Totally. He understood the intricate legal codes, and he knew the prophecies better than almost anyone alive. But then you combine that religious intensity with the cultural fluency of a secular university town like Tarsus.
The Stoic influence.
Yeah. Because he grew up around Stoics and secular thinkers, he understood the mechanisms of pagan logic. He knew how Greek philosophers constructed an argument, what they valued, and how to dismantle their positions using their own rhetorical methods.
He can speak their language.
Flawlessly. And finally, you wrap that massive intellect in the elite legal protection of Roman citizenship. This specific trifecta of traits was absolutely necessary for the task he was about to undertake.
It's just the perfect setup.
It is. He had the vocabulary to speak to strict Jewish enclaves, and he had the rhetorical skill to debate pagan philosophers in the public square, all while holding a legal status that kept him safe from provincial leaders who might otherwise just silence some foreign rabble-rouser.
I like to compare him to a modern high-ranking intelligence officer.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Yeah, imagine someone with an Ivy League background, maybe Oxford or Harvard, who works at the highest levels of the government. They are brilliant, highly motivated, and their specific job is hunting down a grassroots resistance movement.
Taking them out from the inside.
Right. They're actively infiltrating and dismantling this movement. That was Paul. He lived very zealously as a Pharisee, actively persecuting members of the Christian church.
He was the bad guy in their story.
Completely. He was a hostile, antagonistic insider. I mean, he was literally on his way to Damascus with legal warrants to arrest Jewish believers, put them in chains, and drag them back to Jerusalem for punishment.
Just brutal.
And then the ultimate plot twist happens. He is accosted by Jesus near Damascus and completely redirects his entire life. The hunter becomes the primary ambassador for the cause, mandated to proclaim the message to both Israel and primarily the Gentile.
The psychological shock of that event to the people around him, it just cannot be overstated.
They must have thought it was a trick.
Oh, for sure. But his background as a zealous persecutor gave him a unique credibility. He was not some gullible peasant looking for a movement to join. He was the opposition. He was the one holding the coats while believers were stoned to death. For a man of his academic standing and political zeal to suddenly switch sides, to abandon a highly lucrative, prestigious trajectory in Jerusalem and join the very people he was previously hunting, it forces anyone listening to him to pause.
It really makes you think.
It makes the skeptics ask, what could possibly cause a man like Saul of Tarsus to throw away his elite status, subject himself to poverty, and suffer for this new message? It acts as a massive validation of his claims because he had absolutely nothing to gain in the earthly sense.
And everything to lose.
Everything.
See, I am struggling to see how this actually works on the ground, though. I have to push back here a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
A guy with dual citizenship, a university background, and a Pharisee pedigree walking into a working-class Roman tent maker's shop.
Oh.
That sounds like a recipe for immediate rejection.
It sounds like a massive culture clash.
Yeah. People hate elites stepping into their spaces, especially in the ancient world, where society was so rigidly stratified. Elites did not mingle with the lower classes. They completely despised them.
Very true.
So how did he not just get laughed out of the room? How does a guy with this kind of top-tier pedigree sit down with a common laborer or a slave and actually communicate without coming off as completely out of touch?
Well, that is the brilliant tension of his calling. His mandate explicitly required him to cross those precise societal lines, and his background is actually what allowed him to do it.
How so?
He was called to proclaim salvation not only to his fellow people of Israel, but primarily to the Gentiles. This meant stepping out of the polished rabbinical schools and walking into the messy, polytheistic, working-class realities of the Mediterranean world.
Right.
But remember, he wasn't just an academic, he was a tent maker by trade.
Oh, yeah, the physical labor aspect.
Yeah. It was actually a rabbinic tradition to learn a physical trade alongside your studies. So while he possessed the intellect of a top-tier scholar, he had the calloused hands of a tradesman.
That grounds him.
It totally grounds him. He could sit in a leatherworker's shop, stitching canvas together, and use that shared physical labor to build trust. He used his vast education not to elevate himself above the common people, but to translate complex theological realities into language they could naturally grasp.
That makes a lot of sense.
His ability to do both, to reason with kings in a palace, and to work alongside tradesmen in a dusty market, was essential. He could code switch flawlessly depending on his audience.
Which brings us to the actual stage where this specific letter is directed.
Yeah.
So Paul has this perfect elite resume. He is culturally fluent, legally protected, intellectually unmatched. But there is one place that terrifies everyone, a place that could crush even a Roman citizen without even noticing the capital itself. Rome.
The center of the world.
Yeah. He is writing to the most intimidating, elite, and cosmopolitan city on earth at that time. And we really need to visualize what Rome was in the first century.
It's hard to overstate its scale.
It really is. It was the capital of the empire, situated on the Tiber River about 12 miles inland from the coast. The local legend claims it was founded in 753 BC by Romulus and Remus, who were supposedly suckled by a she-wolf.
A very dramatic origin story.
Very dramatic. Now, archaeological evidence shows actual human habitation there, dating all the way back to the 2nd millennium BC. But the Rome that Paul is writing to, the Rome of the first century, is a completely different beast than those early settlements.
The physical and political transformation of Rome leading up to the first century is staggering.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, in the era of the late Republic, Julius Caesar initiated massive town planning. He enhanced the Forum, reorganized the Civic Center, really started shaping the city. But it was his adopted son, Octavian Augustus, who ruled from 31 BC to AD 14, who truly brought the empire into existence as we think of it today.
He's the one who really leveled it up.
Oh, massively. Augustus famously boasted that he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble.
That's a serious flex.
It's a huge flex, and it was true. He created an architecturally overwhelming city. He expanded commercial activity to a global scale and solidified their military might so thoroughly that it ushered in an era of peace known as the Pax Augusta.
Which then transitioned into the famous Pax Romana.
Right.
And we really need to define what the Pax Romana actually was because, Roman peace sounds like this lovely utopian concept.
Like everyone's just holding hands.
Exactly. But it was not a peace built on mutual understanding or diplomatic treaties.
Yeah.
It was a peace achieved through total, brutal military dominance.
Submit or be destroyed.
Right. The Roman legions crushed any opposition so thoroughly that no one dared to start a war. But that sheer military dominance created something unprecedented in human history. It created safe travel.
Which is vital for our story.
It's everything. It created paved roads. The literal physical infrastructure of the Roman Empire allowed a message to travel freely across borders without the constant threat of local warlords, pirates, or impassable terrain.
That is wild to think about.
The sovereign orchestration of history is glaringly visible right there. The engineers designed these deep, multi-layered stone roads strictly for the rapid deployment of Roman legions to crush rebellions.
But those exact same roads were used by couriers carrying letters like the one we are discussing today.
Exactly.
And when you arrived in the city via those roads, the physical reality of Rome itself would have been totally overwhelming. The sheer scale was designed as a form of psychological warfare.
Intimidation by architecture.
Yes. The city's continuing glory featured the famous Forum, the Arch of Titus, the Colosseum, the Circus Maximus, and just massive pagan temples on every corner. When you build a temple with columns 50 feet high, or an entertainment venue that holds hundreds of thousands of screaming spectators, you are sending a very clear message to the individual.
You're saying you are nothing.
You are small, you are insignificant, and the empire is a god.
Wow.
Now, contrast that staggering machinery of the Roman Empire with the fledgling, quiet nature of the early church. You have a city that thrives on military might, grand public entertainment venues where thousands gather for blood sports, and sprawling commerce bringing goods from the edges of the known world.
It's just chaotic.
The sensory overload of first-century Rome, the deafening noise of the markets, the smell of the Tiber River mixing with the smoke of animal sacrifices, the long shadows cast by massive marble monuments dedicated to a pantheon of gods. It would have been intensely intimidating.
If you are the listener sitting in a quiet house gathering of believers in the middle of this metropolis, consider that intimidation factor. I mean, if you're a tiny group of 20 or 30 people, how do you even begin to think your message matters in a city that boasts the Circus Maximus?
It feels impossible.
It does. You are meeting in a dimly lit dining room, perhaps sharing a simple meal of bread and wine, while right outside your door, the Imperial Guard marches past in full armor, and tens of thousands of citizens cheer for gladiatorial combat in the arenas.
The contrast is jarring.
The scale difference is almost comical. The entire culture is basically telling you that physical clout equals truth.
And it forces the believers to rely entirely on the substance of their message rather than the scale of their movement.
Oh, that's good.
Because in a city obsessed with architectural scale, physical dominance, and political leverage, the believers possessed literally none of those things. They had no buildings, no political action committees, and no wealthy benefactors.
Just a letter.
Just a letter. And the letter they are receiving from Paul has to equip them to stand firm in a culture that could crush them without a second thought. The sheer affluence and authority of imperial Rome makes the survival and growth of this small gathering a historical anomaly.
For sure.
They needed a theological framework robust enough to survive that specific pressure cooker, which is why Paul writes with such intense theological depth.
And it wasn't just external pressure they were facing from the empire. The internal situation was arguably worse.
Oh, this is a mess inside.
Inside this massive, affluent, pagan metropolis sits this tiny anomaly of a church, and it is dealing with intense internal demographic shifts. So let's look at the actual origin of this specific community.
Because Paul didn't start it?
Right. Paul did not found this church. Unlike Corinth or Ephesus, where he spent years physically planting and building the community from the ground up, Rome was completely different. The church in Rome was likely started in a completely grassroots manner by Roman Jews and proselytes.
And let's clarify what a proselyte is for the listener.
Good idea.
A proselyte was a Gentile, a non-Jew, who had fully converted to Judaism. They took on all the ceremonial laws, including circumcision and dietary restrictions.
So they were fully in.
Fully in. So these Roman Jews and proselytes had traveled to Jerusalem for the festival of Pentecost. While there, they heard Peter speak, witnessed the events of that day, believed the message, and then simply packed up and returned home to the capital.
They just brought it back with them.
Yeah, they started meeting in homes, sharing what they learned. Now, Paul knew a few people there eventually, like the husband and wife team Priscilla and Aquila, but he had never physically been to the city himself.
That's wild to think about.
He writes this letter from Corinth on his third missionary expedition in the spring of AD 57 because, as he states, he was continually prevented from visiting them earlier.
The composition of that grassroots audience is highly significant. The membership of the Roman Church was mixed, composed of both Jews and Gentiles living side by side.
Which is a delicate balance.
Very delicate. By the time Paul writes the letter, the Gentiles were the larger contingent, but there was a substantial Jewish presence. And to understand the extreme friction in that room, we have to look at the historical timeline of the city.
The political history really impacts the church here.
It does. The historian Josephus states there were thousands of Jews living in Rome during the time of Augustus. They were a massive, influential bloc in the city. However, in AD 49, the Emperor Claudius issued a decree that expelled all the Jews from Rome entirely.
And that expulsion in AD 49 is the absolute key to understanding the entire social dynamic of the letter.
It changes everything.
It really does. Imagine the absolute sociological chaos of that moment. Up until that point, the Jewish believers were undoubtedly leading the movement.
Naturally.
Right? They had the historical background, they had memorized the Old Testament scriptures, and they understood the cultural context of the Messiah. They were the mentors.
And then they're just gone.
Suddenly, by imperial decree, every single person of Jewish descent is forced to pack whatever they can carry and leave the city. The Gentile believers are left behind in Rome
To fend for themselves.
for several years. These Gentiles who come from completely pagan backgrounds are running the Roman church alone. Think about what happens when the foundational leadership is removed.
They make their own rules.
Yeah, the Gentiles develop their own rhythms, they start leading the house churches, they develop their own ways of conducting the gatherings, and they are completely free from the cultural influence of the Jewish believers.
So they aren't keeping kosher dietary laws.
Nope. They aren't observing the Jewish festival calendar, they're just doing their own thing.
But then Claudius dies, and the edict is lifted. So by the time Paul writes in AD 57, the Jews have returned. We know from the historical data that by Nero's time, there was a firmly established Jewish population again, with at least 10 separate synagogues documented by archaeological inscriptions in Rome.
They bounce back quickly.
They did. So put yourself in the shoes of those returning Jewish believers. You come back to your home city after years of miserable imperial exile. You go to find the religious movement you started, only to discover it is now entirely run by Gentiles.
Who are doing everything wrong in your eyes.
Right. You walk into the house church and they were serving pork. They aren't observing the Sabbath in the way you expect.
And this created an unavoidable, explosive clash of cultures.
It had to.
You have intense disputes over dietary habits, calendar observations, and traditional laws. The Jewish believers feel ownership because of their heritage, their scriptures, and their role in founding the church in the first place. They feel like the Gentiles are disrespecting the ancient laws.
We started this.
Yeah. And on the other side, the Gentile believers feel ownership because they kept the church alive during the exile.
We kept the lights on.
Right. They faced the persecution of Rome alone while the Jews were gone, and now they represent the vast majority of the congregation. They feel like the returning Jews are trying to drag them backward into obsolete ceremonial rules.
This is a recipe for absolute division. You have a fractured audience sitting in the heart of the most intimidating city on earth. The external pressure of Rome's psychological warfare is bearing down on them from the outside, and the internal pressure of ethnic and demographic friction is tearing them apart from the inside.
This raises an important question. How does a leader from afar, who has never even been to the city, attempt to unify two completely different demographic groups who both feel absolute ownership over the local movement?
It's a huge pastoral puzzle.
It's massive. Paul is writing to a room full of people who are likely sitting on opposite sides of the house just glaring at each other. He cannot just give a generic feel-good speech.
Oh, can't we all just get along? He's going to cut it.
Not at all. He has to address the spiritual condition, the prejudices, and the needs of both groups with pinpoint accuracy. He has to dismantle the pride of the Jewish believers who think their heritage saves them, and he has to dismantle the arrogance of the Gentile believers who think they have replaced the Jews.
Which is why his communication strategy, his blueprint for spreading the message, is so calculated. Because the audience across the empire is completely fractured across ethnic and intellectual lines, Paul relies on a highly adaptable method to reach them.
Very strategic.
Extremely. He explicitly states he felt obligated to both Greeks and non-Greeks, or Hellenes and barbarians. We should probably define those terms for the listener.
Yeah, let's break that down.
A Hellene was anyone who spoke Greek and practiced the cultured Greek way of life, regardless of their actual ethnicity.
It was more of a cultural status.
Right. The Greeks called anyone who didn't speak Greek a barbarian because their foreign languages sounded like bar to the Greek ear.
A babbling.
Yeah. So Paul is saying he is obligated to the highly cultured elites and the uneducated foreigners alike.
He also states he was obligated to the wise and the foolish.
Meaning?
Well, he had to hold his own with the intellectuals at the Areopagus in Athens. The Areopagus was essentially the supreme court of ideas in the ancient world. It was a massive rocky outcropping where the greatest philosophers gathered to debate.
The ultimate academic stage.
Definitely. He had to engage the Epicureans, who were essentially the materialists of the ancient world. They believed that the physical world was all that existed, and the goal of life was just the absence of pain.
Live for today.
Right. And he had to engage the Stoics, who believed in a rigid, logical fatalism and the suppression of emotion. And then, in the very next town, he had to communicate clearly to ordinary people who had no philosophical training at all, like a blue-collar Philippian jailer or a fortune-telling slave girl in the marketplace.
So what does this all mean for his day-to-day operations? How do you reach such a massive, diverse spectrum of humanity?
You need a system.
You do. And his sequential method was strictly first for the Jew, then for the Gentile. He always went to the local synagogues first. We see this exact pattern repeated across the entire Mediterranean Damascus, Jerusalem, Pisidian Antioch, Iconium, Thessalonica, Berea, Corinth, and Ephesus.
Everywhere he went.
Every time he hits a new city, he drops his bags and heads straight for the synagogue. Now, he didn't do this just out of ethnic loyalty to his own people. He did it because it was the most brilliantly efficient and logical starting point for his message.
Let's explain why the synagogue was the perfect tactical beachhead.
Please do.
The synagogue provided a pre-assembled audience composed of Jews, God-fearing Gentiles, and proselytes. These individuals already possessed the necessary theological vocabulary.
They weren't starting from scratch.
Not at all. They knew the Old Testament history, they understood the concept of a single sovereign creator, they knew what a blood sacrifice meant, and they held to a worldview anticipating a Messiah. By starting there, Paul could make a direct, textual argument that the specific promises they had been waiting centuries for had finally arrived.
Think of it like a guest lecturer arriving at a massive university.
Okay, I like this.
You have this groundbreaking new theory on advanced calculus that you want to teach the student body. You don't walk into the student union cafeteria and start shouting equations at freshmen eating their lunch.
They just stare at you.
They would. They don't have the vocabulary. They don't know the baseline formulas. If you start there, you will spend 10 years just teaching them basic addition before you can even get to the calculus. Instead, you go directly to the math department. You stand in front of the professors and the graduate students, the people who already have the textbooks and understand the baseline concepts. Paul went to the people who already had the texts.
Spot on. The reaction to this method, as the historical data notes, was always split. Some believed and some did not.
Naturally.
But those who did believe immediately formed a highly educated, textually literate core group. When Paul was inevitably kicked out of the synagogue by those who rejected his message, he took that literate core group with him, and they formed the new local gathering.
I see.
That core group could then turn around and teach the pagan Gentiles. The Jewish believers already knew the scriptures, so they became the teachers for the new converts who were coming out of completely pagan backgrounds.
But his real brilliance was his total adaptability. He didn't force the synagogue method if the environment didn't allow for it.
He was flexible.
Totally flexible. The sources explicitly state that if he found himself in a purely pagan town with no synagogue at all, like Lystra or Derbe, or if he was standing among those Epicurean and Stoic philosophers in Athens, he adapted completely. He dealt with them from their own pagan setting.
He met them where they were.
Yes. He didn't demand that you read the book of Genesis before he would speak to them. He stood in the Areopagus and quoted their own pagan poets to them. He used their own statues and their own altars, like the altar to an unknown god, as his opening illustration.
That's brilliant public speaking.
It is. He met them precisely where their intellectual framework was positioned and built a bridge from their natural observations of the world to his specific message.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this systematic approach, the synagogue-first strategy, coupled with total adaptability in pagan settings, allowed the movement to plant highly resilient hubs in major commercial centers.
Like little outposts.
Exactly. By establishing a literate, grounded core group in places like Corinth, Ephesus, and eventually reaching Rome, the message could naturally branch out to the surrounding rural regions, reaching the foolish and the barbarians that Paul mentioned.
It's a viral strategy.
It really is. The strategy capitalized on the existing infrastructure of Jewish diasporic communities while leveraging the Roman road system and the enforced peace of the Pax Romana to ensure maximum geographical spread. It is an absolute masterclass in utilizing every available resource.
It is a stunning display of strategic thinking. You take a man with the highest academic pedigree, give him Roman citizenship, place him in a world unified by paved roads and a common language, and watch him systematically dismantle the cultural barriers between Jews and Gentiles in the most powerful cities on earth.
It's hard not to be amazed by it.
So we have looked at Paul's highly specific, paradoxical resume. We have examined the intimidating imperial grandness and the psychological warfare of first-century Rome. We've uncovered the fractured post-exile demographics of the local believers who received this letter, and we have analyzed the brilliant adaptability of Paul's blueprint for communication.
The facts presented here provide a stark contrast to a sanitized Sunday school view of history.
Oh, totally.
The early believers were operating in a highly volatile, politically charged environment. The unity Paul called for in his letter was not some theoretical feel-good concept. It was a desperate necessity for a community attempting to survive the crushing external pressures of Rome and the internal friction of their own demographic divide.
They needed it to survive.
Yes, every detail, from Claudius's expulsion to Paul's birth in the university town of Tarsus, was an essential, sovereignly placed component in the historical timeline.
I want you to look at your own background for a moment. Think about all those seemingly disconnected experiences you have had. Your secular education, your religious upbringing, your varied cultural exposures, the jobs you hated, the cities you lived in, the different social circles you have observed.
All those random pieces.
Right, all those random pieces. How might those exact details be preparing you for the specific rooms you are called to speak in today? Paul's entire life was preparation for an audience he didn't even know yet.
That's a great perspective to hold.
Which leads me to a final thought for you to mull over. Paul wrote this masterpiece of a letter to the Romans, specifically because his plans were thwarted.
Yet he was blocked.
He was prevented from visiting Rome in person at that time. He had planned to go many times, as the text says, but was blocked by various circumstances. If he had just taken a boat and visited them as he originally intended, he would have spoken his message aloud, they would have heard it.
Yeah.
We likely would not have the written text of Romans today.
Right.
So consider how your own current limitations, roadblocks, or delayed plans might actually be the exact catalyst for your most far-reaching work.